Hello there, thank you for joining us for Church Online. My name is Michael, and if we haven't met yet, I've been helping out as a pastor on the north side for the last few months, and so excited that you have joined us today as we continue our summer series talking about the Psalms of the summer. And this morning, before we get into the psalm, I want to issue just a challenge. Now, if you win the challenge, I don't have a prize. I'm not authorized to give you anything. But if you get this challenge right, congratulations, you're doing awesome today. But the challenge is this. I want you to think of a movie that everybody would know. If you went to the grocery store and asked everybody, you picked one movie, say, hey, have you seen this movie? What would be answered 100% correct all the time? Could you think of one? Can you think of a movie that everybody's seen? I think you'd struggle with that. I know I would, because somewhere along the way, someone hasn't seen the Lion King. Someone hasn't seen the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Someone hasn't seen the Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. Movies have so many different genres, and people have different feelings and thoughts and opinions on movies that it would be really, really hard to nail down one movie that everybody, let's say even in West Michigan, one movie that everybody in West Michigan has seen. It'd be nearly impossible to do. But this morning, what I think we're going to be diving into today in our psalm is a psalm that I think everybody has heard, at least maybe once. Even if you didn't know that this is where this psalm came from, even if you didn't know it was a psalm, maybe you've never cracked open the Bible, maybe this is the first time you've been watching church online, maybe you've never been to church, but I think you will have heard these words somewhere in some shape, in some form. I think these are the most famous words in human history. And I think what we're going to be doing today is opening them up and maybe learning a little bit about who God is and what He has done for us. So even if you can't think of a movie that everybody's seen, these are some words I think you're going to know, and hopefully we'll learn a little bit about who God is and what He has done for us. We're going to be jumping into a psalm. If you haven't guessed it already, it's Psalm 23, or known as the 23rd Psalm. And we're going to read it, we're going to dissect it, we're going to ask two questions of this psalm. The first question is this: what do we learn about God through this psalm, through these words? So that's the first question. The second question, we are going to ask, what does this psalm, what do these words teach us about who we are, about how we're wired, about how we operate as human beings? And we're going to do that because it's so easy to skip through words that we're fairly familiar with. Like, we don't slow down, we don't stop. If you've seen a movie that you've seen 100 times, it's pretty easy to kind of put your brain on autopilot and just watch different scenes because you know what's coming next. You know what's going to happen. You don't need to really think too hard or too critical about what's coming next. I think we do the same thing with words and things we know. And so with this psalm, because it's so popular, because people seem to know the words, it's pretty easy to just kind of fly through it. So we're going to slow down today. We're going to dissect it just a little bit. And we're going to see again, how is God teaching us about Himself? What are we learning about God? And what are we learning about ourselves in this psalm? So we're going to jump into Psalm 23, and it sounds like this. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now, my guess is that as soon as I started reading those words, something in your heart and something in your head kind of dinged and went, oh, I've heard these before. I think I know these. I've heard these somewhere. Well, this is the 23rd Psalm. These words have been used everywhere. They've been read everywhere. They've been put to songs and sung. They've been cut up and used in pop culture. They've been recited at all sorts of different occasions, whether it's a wedding or maybe a funeral or maybe a baptism. These words are absolutely everywhere. They're put on pillows, they're put on paintings, they're cross-stitched and then hung on the wall. Maybe a grandparent has done that with these words. They are literally everywhere, and this psalm, for most would say this is one of the most famous psalms in the entire book, and some of the most famous words in human history. And so they're important, and they actually teach us something about who God is, and he teaches something about us. And in the midst of these very familiar words, like I said before, it's very easy to just skip over them and say, oh, that made me feel good. I'm so glad he read that. Well, let's learn a little bit about who God is in the midst of these words. So what does God say about himself in these words? The first point I want us to recognize is that the focus of this psalm is God. It leads off, the Lord is my shepherd. The first priority point is God himself. And once we get that order right in our minds, the rest of the psalm kind of starts to piece itself together. But too often as we approach this psalm, as we approach a lot of things, we tend to look at it from our own perspective, look at it from almost selfishly to say, what am I going to get out of this? How am I fitting into this? I think a lot of times we like this psalm because we read it and we say, oh, look at all the things I get. The Lord anoints me. The Lord sets a table up for me. The Lord is my shepherd. We look at it very, very selfishly. And we can't say, oh, hey, I'm not going to do that, because we all do it. I remember the first time I read this, I thought, oh, this is great. Look at all the great things the Lord has done for me. Now, we are in this psalm. I'm not denying that one bit. But the leading off point, the first point, the focal point for this is that the Lord, God himself, is the priority, is the first and foremost thing in this passage. And when we read it and we say, okay, now that God is the priority, we see that it's not really us, then all of a sudden the things start to fall in place. These things start to fall in line. And it makes more sense. So when we read it, we have God as the emphasis. We start seeing that he is the shepherd. He is the one that gives the blessing. He is the one that sets the table before my enemies. He's the one that protects me. He is the one that comforts me. And it's his house. Well, that sounds very different. The focal point is not on me. It's on God. And once we get that lined up, once we get that in place, things start to make a lot more sense. And I think we would admit in our own lives, when the focus is off of us and on God, our priorities start to shift and the world looks a little differently. When we say that God is first and God is the priority and he's the one I want to focus on first and foremost, the problems of the world look different. Our own problems in our lives look different. We start seeing things very, very differently when we say God is the first and foremost priority. Just like this psalm. Okay? So that's the first thing. We see that God is the one leading off. He's first and foremost. The Lord is my shepherd. Now, once that first priority is set, we say, okay, what is God doing? Well, God is taking care of his people. God is taking care of those who are trying to be underneath him. We see that first there's a priority, and now we're positionally talking about how is God taking care of us. And we see that the language being used is that of a shepherd. So I grew up in central Indiana and grew up on a farm. This is farming language. And I understand this because we had sheep on our farm. And I remember very distinctly one night waking up to hearing this banging noise, just bang, bang, bang. And it was about maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I remember putting my shoes on and heading out to the barn because I was hoping there wasn't something trying to get into the barn, and it just kept coming, bang, bang, bang. And I remember saying, what in the world is going on here? So I get out to the barn, I open the barn door, and what I find is one of our sheep had decided that it was time for him to be up, and that the best way to get out of the barn was to lead head first, get a full running sprint, and knock himself into the metal barn door. And he did this again and again and again and again. And I looked at it and just went, oh, there's no helping this poor sheep. I don't have words for that level of stupid. Because the sheep did it again and again and again. Just boom, boom, boom. Now, when we say that the Lord is our shepherd, we've got to admit that we're his sheep. And if we're even being more honest, we've got to admit that we need some help. Now, maybe you're not running into a metal barn door again and again and again. Maybe you are. That's not a great choice. I'd recommend not doing that. But if we're honest, if we're left to ourselves, we make some pretty poor choices. Maybe it feels like we're running into a metal barn door again and again and again, leading with our face first. Or maybe for you, the imagery isn't a barn or a farm, but maybe it's a boat. And you're on the boat, and if left to yourself, you make some poor choices on your boat and you run straight into the dock. Or maybe it's a tree stand, and you're saying, man, if left to myself, I'd be up in the tree stand and I'd fall asleep and fall out of the tree stand. That would be a poor choice. Or maybe it's none of those things, or maybe it's shopping at Target. And if left to yourself, you're going to go to Target with no list and no plan and just an endless checkbook, and you are going to make some pretty poor decisions left to yourself in a Target run. We've got to admit that left to ourselves, we make some pretty poor choices. In fact, we can make so many poor decisions that it feels like we're sabotaging anything that God might be doing in our lives. And that leaves us to a point where we have to admit that we need help. We have to admit that we need someone to take care of us, to lead the way, to help us in our deepest times of need. We need a shepherd. In fact, we need a good shepherd. And so once we realize that God is saying, I want to be this good shepherd, and we take the words of this psalm and say, yes, Lord, I want you to be this good shepherd, we are positionally making a change. We are saying, God, I'm not the most important thing anymore, you are. And God, I can't do this on myself. I need you to help me. I want to be under your care. And once we make those two very clear distinctions, we start to see that this psalm, again, starts to line up even clearer. We see that once we're under God's care, lots of things start to line up and lots of things start to work in our favor. He prepares a table for us. He will let us dwell in his house forever. He will take care of us. He will nurture us. He will help us. He will love us. If we let him care for us, if we positionally say, look, God, I want you to be my shepherd. But the psalm doesn't stop there. There's one other thing that we've got to ask. Remember, there are two questions we're going to ask. First one is, what do we learn about God? We learn that God is a priority and we need to be under his care. The second question we need to ask is, what do we learn about us? And we've already mentioned a lot of things, but there's one in particular I want to highlight as we come to the second half of this psalm. The psalm talks about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. It says, I will fear no evil. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. The psalm says that you will prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Now, it's important to note that as we hear these words, again, it's really easy to gloss over them and say, I've heard these before. These are great words. But really think about for a second what it's saying. It says, though I walk through the valley. Doesn't mean the valley disappears. Doesn't mean that hard times are going away. Notice that it says, your rod and staff, they comfort me. In farming terms, a rod and a staff are there to direct and guide. And sometimes you got to knock a sheep pretty hard to get it going in the right direction. And it says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Notice that the enemies don't disappear. They're literally around you. They're in your presence. It means they're not going away. I think too often when we think about a life following God and a life devoted to God, we think that all of these things are just gone, almost as if God is a magic genie, and if I say the right words and I hold my mouth the right way and I hop on one foot 3 times, that all of a sudden things are just going to disappear, and life is going to be rainbows and roses and unicorns. And that's not true. This psalm says life still may be difficult. Life still may be challenging. It says, I'm going to walk through the valley, though I walk through this valley. Though I have enemies around me, the Lord has prepared a table for me. My friends, what I want us to realize today as you're watching this is that even though you may be going through hard things, God has not abandoned you. God has not left you out to be by yourself. And what we learn about ourselves, if we try to do this on our own, it'll feel exhausting and you'll be tired. And I think we try to do that again and again and again with this life and all the things that it throws our way. But God says, I'm going to be with you. I've not abandoned you. I've not left you for dead. I see you. I hear you. I'm with you. And this psalm points us to the fact that God is going to fight for us, so we don't have to fight for ourselves. Let that be a comfort for you today. Let that be something that nourishes your soul. Let that be something that washes over you. And you say, okay, I see this. God, I want this. I absolutely want this. This is coming from the same God that a little bit in a different spot of the Bible, God has said that I'm going to go before you. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 45, he says these words. He says, I will go before you. I will level the mountains. I will smash down the gates of bronze. I will cut through bars of iron. I will give you the hidden treasures, hidden in the darkness, the secret riches. I will do this so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, the one who calls you by name. The Lord goes before you. Even though there may be valleys, even though there may be hard things, God has gone before you and nothing surprises him. That should be a comfort and care to us. Because nothing has surprised God about what you're going through. He's seen it before. In fact, he's seen it so much that he's prepared a table for you in the presence of your enemies. He knows you're going to be walking through a valley. The only thing that has changed when we say, Lord, I want you to be my shepherd, the only thing that has changed is the person caring for you. And it's not yourself, it's God. Let that be what we take from this today. That God is the one taking care of you. Now, we can try to do this on our own. As beautiful as these words are in Psalm 23, we can try to do this life on our own. We can try to follow God on our own. We can try to do a bunch of different things on our own. But as hopefully you've seen, if we try to do this on our own, we have failed. Maybe that's been your experience. You've been trying to do this on your own for a long time. We will fall short. I will fall short if I try to do this by myself. We need a good shepherd. I need a good shepherd. You need a good shepherd. This is what we need. We need to be under the care of someone who understands us, someone who loves us, someone who can comfort us, someone who is compassionate with us, someone who has gone before us. And this good shepherd, his name is Jesus. Jesus in the Gospel of John chapter 10 says, I am the good shepherd. He says, there's another one who will come. He's a thief. He comes to kill and destroy and damage everything that God is trying to do. But this good shepherd, Jesus, comes to bring life. And life under his care is beautiful. Life under his care is incredible. So when I read the words of Psalm 23, and I see that the Lord is my shepherd and I shall not want, I think of Jesus as Jesus being the good shepherd. Because he is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Jesus leads me beside the still waters. Jesus is the one that restores my soul. Jesus is the one that prepares the table. Jesus is the one that anoints and blesses me. Jesus is the one that gives me mercy and grace and care. And it's Jesus' house that we will dwell in forever. So if you are looking for that good shepherd today, let's put our faith and trust in Jesus. I got to do it every day. I wake up in the morning and say, Jesus, I'm going to put my faith and trust in you today. We get to do all of this because it's Jesus who died on the cross for us. It is Jesus who rose to life, what we celebrate at Easter. And because of that, we get to have new life. That's why life under his care is so beautiful, because he's taking care of all of it for us already. It's not anything we have to do. It's not anything we have to say. We say, Lord, I want you to take care of me. So the question I wanted to leave us with today is this. Do we want to keep running into metal barn doors? Do we want to keep leading face first into what troubles us? Or do we want to put our faith and trust in the Good Shepherd, in what Jesus has done for you and for me? I want to pray as we close, and then that'll be the end of today. So let's pray. God, thank you for who you are. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the psalm that is known so well in human history. I pray today that as we read and have read these words, that we would take a moment to pause, to see who you are, to see what you've done for us, to see how you love us. Lord, may we put you as our first priority. Lord, may we be under your care. Would we give up our own ambitions? Would we say, Lord, I want you to be here, and I want to be under your care. God, help us make that decision each and every day. We thank you that you have died on the cross for us. We thank you that you have risen to new life, and we get to have new life because of what you've done. God, guide us as we go. In Jesus' name, amen.